have only started.
We meet today in freedom's cause and raise our voices high. We'll join our hands in union strong to battle or to die. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts beat strong. Side by side we battle onward, victory shall come.
Hi, my name is David Whittemore. I'm the managing editor of the Free Stehekin, the newspaper. It's an underground newspaper produced and created by the students that go to Cascade High School. I'm just going to get down to the point. Last year, our superintendent, Carol Whitehead, along with the Everett School District, began enforcing prior review among its high school newspapers. As a student voice, we believe that prior review takes away from such a free speech coming from the high school itself. To students, being a public forum means that they're creating a place where they're allowing to choose what is important to write about, not what the teacher administrators think is right. A public forum is a place where students are allowed to confront and discuss the issues that are important to them, a place where that shows teenagers that their ideas have merit, which we believe is extremely important because Everett School District reporters, like many teens today, want to prove to our society that a better world is possible. Even if our words aren't the answers to someone else's questions, after the school board decided to uphold Principal Catherine Matthews' decisions and Superintendent Carol Whitehead's decision to withhold funds from student publications until they removed the words public forum from their masthead, and after the school board allowed an administrator prior review of their papers, the editors-in-chief of the Kodak, Claire Lewinberg and Sarah Eccleston, as well as the editor-in-chief of the Stehekin, Amanda Franke, have decided to take the school district to federal court with the date set from May 29, 2007. Throughout all 4 years of high school, students are taught in their history classes to respect those who have stood up for their rights. Rosa Parks, Mahatma Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., and Cesar Chavez are upheld as heroes. So student journalists reason the faculty of the Everett School District should not be disappointed by their students or look down on those who have resisted prior review, but they should be proud. And thanks to the democratic standards taught in schools today, students have taken their history lessons to heart and have embedded them in their own principles and into the pages of the Free Stehekin, which you should get because it's a cool newspaper in the back. Historian David Dogard, he is the director of the Northwest Room here in the library. He's going to give you a little brief rundown of the Everett Massacre itself and what it relates to the Free Stehekin newspaper. So.
Thank you. Could we catch the lights back there? The shingle weavers, who had a good, strong union in Everett, had mixed results bartering with the mill owners, but in most cases they did a good job of representing the guys who risked their hands and arms and lungs in those mills every day. You have to realize that one of the reasons the shingle weavers were such an effective union in Everett and in the early days was that they were highly motivated. Here you see machines made by the Sumner Iron Works in Everett lined up inside an Everett shingle mill. These are upright shingle machines that you actually use to clip the shingles from the blocks that come up from downstairs. This machine, these machines have no guards on them. Not unusual that somebody be working on one of these machines for a while and eventually is going to make a mistake. The sad joke that existed well into the middle of the 20th century was that you could identify a shingle weaver because sooner or later he was going to make a mistake and he'd wind up missing fingers or hands. It made them militant. They were well organized and well represented, and they, 1st of May, entered into a strike in 1916. 1916, Donald McRae, the county sheriff, was cruising into the last year of his second term, universally respected as a lawman who was fair. As a matter of fact, An African-American prisoner who'd been held in the Snohomish County Jail complimented Don McCrae in a letter, telling him that he was treated like a real human being. He was treated by a sheriff who was a civilized man, and he had never really encountered that. That McCrae impressed everybody with his even-handedness as a law enforcement official in Snohomish County. But in 1916, the Shingle Weavers ran directly into the political ambitions of Roland H. Hartley. Mr. Hartley had been the mayor of the city of Everett. He ran the mill that was arguably the biggest shingle mill in Everett at the time, and he was running for the Republican gubernatorial nomination in 1916. He needed to show that in his own hometown, he could maintain the open shop policy that he was preaching to the voters. Therefore, the handshake agreement that the local shingle weavers had made was not honored. They went on strike the 1st of May of 1916, and they got themselves locked out and shut down. Within a couple of months, it was apparent that they were not going to win this particular strike. The IWW began to arrive in Everett because they saw the failure of that strike, and their argument was that your process of bargaining with the master class is not going to succeed. That what you need to do, and this is where the Wobblies really ran afoul with people like Roland Hartley, is take over the means of production and run the mills yourself. The Wobblies were present in Everett from a date not too long after they were first organized in Chicago back in 1905. But you need to understand that they were not the people that were in the Central Labor Council offices down at the Labor Temple. The Wobblies were here to point out the failure of the trade union system in collectively bargaining for the rights of men in the mills. Now, the place that they could argue this was on the corner of Hewitt and Wetmore. Here you see the old commercial hotel, the Capitol Saloon. As you can see in this picture, large crowds of working men accumulated there. This had been traditionally the spot where anybody could speak up until 1913, when that ordinance was passed, and which had been selectively enforced since. The city then turned to Donald McCrae to enforce the ordinance against the IWW. The city police in Everett, quite frankly, didn't want the political fallout from having to wage war on street speakers in the middle of the central business district. They let Donald McCrae step in, and at first McCrae enforced the law against the IWW by pulling them down from their soapboxes and running them over to the jail, which was over on Rockefeller and Pacific. Down on the waterfront at Neil Jameson's mill, he decided that he was going to parade his scab laborers up to Colby Avenue and give them a free night at the show at the Everett Theater. The Everett Theater had a fellow by the name of Alexander, the Man Who Knows. He was a mind reader who was supposed to be able to predict the future. Actually, he was also a magician. Perhaps Mr. Jameson should have consulted with Alexander before he brought his scab laborers up Hewitt Avenue over onto Colby and into this building, because by the time Alexander's performance was over, that alley on the left was full of really, really angry shingle weavers who'd been locked out of their jobs and were trying to figure out how to feed their families and keep a roof over their heads. This was not the IWW. This was the local shingle weavers union who'd had scabs thrown in their face by a local mill owner. When the scabs came back out of the theater, the people in the alley fell upon them. Shots were fired. They chased them back down Hewitt Avenue toward the water. One scab's house was attacked and all the windows knocked out. And the following morning in the Everett newspapers, there was a group that called itself the Committee, saying that they were volunteering to maintain order on Everett streets, that they were no longer going to see shooting and baseball bats flying on Hewitt Avenue in the town that they loved. That committee swelled the ranks of Don McCrae's deputies. And the end of October, things escalated yet another notch when a group of demonstrators were met at the Everett City Dock, where the Everett Massacre was to take place a month later, just a week later, excuse me. And they were carried out to Beverly Park and forced to run a gauntlet at the cattle guards where the interurban train crossed the road out at Beverly Park. The local mill had manufactured little baseball bats especially for the occasion, and they beat some of the IWW demonstrators so badly that the next morning Everett religious leaders went out there and they could find broken teeth and pools of blood on the ground where these men had been beaten. On that occasion, A comment that was testified to under oath in the trial that followed the Everett Massacre was made by Donald McCrae. When one of the people being beaten protested that he had constitutional rights, Donald McCrae said, "You're in Snohomish County now, and we make the laws." Sunday, November 5th, the IWW were convinced that they were going to come back with enough people, armed thoroughly enough, that they weren't going to be subjected to that kind of brutality again. If you look carefully, you can see that claustrophobic little clustering of finger piers there. The one closest to us is Pier 1, where the aluminum storage dome is today. The one in the middle is the city dock. And on the far side, the light painted one, is the Oriental dock with the clear story windows across the top. If you look at this, you realize that that little white boat that's pulled up, well, just a few hundred feet in front of where the Verona pulled up on November 5th, is in a terrible crossfire. It can actually be fired upon from points on either side of Pier 2, the city dock, and even some points further east from there shooting back. Not a good place to be if you're expecting to get shot at. This is a picture of the Verona. The Verona was the vessel that the Wobblies came up on November 5th, a wooden passenger steamer, propeller-driven, of the type that comprised the Mosquito Fleet, the little wooden passenger boats that plied Puget Sound between Everett, Seattle, Tacoma, Bellingham. The warehouse, the distant warehouse, is where the deputies were. The man in the bowler hat is standing where Don McCrae would have stood, and holding up his hand the way McCrae did to stop the Wobblies from singing. As the Verona pulled into the dock, they were singing Hold the Fort, an English transit workers song that they kind of transmogrified for their own purposes. There was a piano on board the Verona, so they actually could have a musical accompaniment to their singing. As a matter of fact, one of the horrifying memories we got from a person we interviewed 30 years ago was the sound of bullets hitting that piano, a horrible discord that it made as the Verona was under fire from several different angles. Said the Verona is riding a little higher than she would have on November 5th. Probably the men standing, crowding that forward rail there would have been not looking McCrae in the eye, but actually looking somewhere about his midriff because the boat was weighed down with several hundred passengers. Another photograph taken shows the Verona in that same spot, and again here she's riding closer to the way she would have been in the water with the tidal conditions of Sunday, November 5th, 1916. Side view in the distance, you can see the coal bunkers where riflemen fired on the Verona. That turned out to be extremely important because when this matter eventually found its way into court, as you can see, the deadly possibility of a crossfire, of friendly fire, raking across the Verona and hitting the men who were standing on the dock. As a matter of fact, the citizen deputies who were on the dock space between the outer warehouse and the waiting room area were exposed to fire, perhaps even more than the IWW on the boat. That Verona was secured only by a bow line, and she drifted out so that, in fact, the men on the coal bunkers were firing almost directly at her stern, which presented a very narrow target, and shots that missed, of course, would go right on past into the warehouse, into the dock, between the warehouses. We don't really know how many people died. We know that when the shooting started, all the Wobblies that had crowded the port rail of the Verona ran to the starboard side and nearly caused the vessel to keel over. It was only the bow line that apparently stopped that roll, but several men fell from the deck of the Verona, and we know that none of those were ever recovered officially and counted. But late in his life, I interviewed an Everett policeman who'd been down on the waterfront at the time that they had recovered several bodies that they decided not to make public. They washed up days after the Everett Massacre, and it was decided simply to take them out and bury them at sea out in the deep water near Mukilteo. They put them on a tugboat, and he said that he actually saw at least 5 bodies that were wrapped up and destined to be buried out there in the deep water. Everett at that point didn't need any more scandal, so the bodies were just quietly disposed of. The Wobblies said that a number of the membership cards that had been collected when everybody was boarding the vessel were never picked up, and they suspected that those membership cards were the people that fell overboard and were shot to death in the water by fire from the coal bunkers on Pier 1 and also from the dock area near the city dock and then in the eastern warehouse. To tell you the truth, we do not know who fired the first shot. I think anybody who spends any time thinking about this realizes that in the case where men are standing exposed to fire that probably neither side expected to actually wind up getting shot at. and that whoever it was that pulled off that shot was responsible for the deaths of people on his own side. As it turned out, McCrae was wounded. Joe Irving, one of his sidekicks, was wounded in the legs. A number of people were seriously wounded on the dock. Only 2 of them actually died. The Wobblies immediately after the Everett Massacre began a campaign that was probably the high point of Wobbly propaganda art, as they were very gifted at writing songs to speak of their cause. And here you see the plaster casts of the 5 IWW on the Verona whose bodies were recovered. 3 of them were buried in Mount Pleasant Cemetery on Queen Anne Hill. The other 2 were shipped back to heartbroken families elsewhere in the United States. In one case, Abraham Rabinowitz's little sister was only 14, picked up his body, which has been shipped back in a box to New York. Charles Ashley, the English poet, delivered a very eloquent eulogy at Mount Pleasant Cemetery for the 3 IWW who were interred up there. As I mentioned, the Wobblies had poetry, they had music, they had artists. They did a very eloquent job of expressing their viewpoint. Phrases like "an injury to one is an injury to all" are things that I'm sure we all can embrace. They're holding a poster there that was one of the beautiful memorial artworks that was produced after the Everett Massacre. Done by an artist by the name of M. Pass. It exhorts you to remember your dead. It was the names of the dead, and confers immortality upon them. The faces up above, the faces of the 5 martyrs from November 5th, faces inside poppies, inside flowers. And the heartbroken workers marching across a stormy-looking sky. Sometimes they weren't quite so elegant. This is a cartoon attacking Everett. Everett there is characterized as a blood-stained dowager. The title of this poem, of this cartoon, was "Primp and Prime, you can't efface the bloody stain." And you can see there industrialists encouraging the dowager that now she's in line for some really wonderful industries because she's shown her murderous proclivities and will enjoy nothing but success. In the upper right-hand corner, the graves of the dead from November 5th. And 74 IWW were arrested upon their return to Seattle. Actually, all of them were, but then they held 74 and decided to charge them with murder. There was a change of venue. Obviously, that made good sense to move it somewhere other than Snohomish County so they get a fair trial. Moved it down to King County, and for some reason decided to prosecute them one by one by one. We have Jack Miller and his descriptions of that whole experience that were collected back during Jack's participation in a number of our memorial cruises. Jack was on the Verona on November 5th. Jack was in his 80s when we first discovered him and had amazing stories about what it was like to be incarcerated in the Snohomish County Jail. Jack was one of the people who sang a very amusing song about Don McCrae to anger him, wishing him every possible evil, and they'd all sing it until he was nearly crazy from it. Jack died some time ago now, but during the time that he was alive, he was an amazing nexus, direct connection between those years and our present. As a matter of fact, he still had the same fire and conviction that we imagine he brought with him on the Verona back in 1916. He and his wife were active in civil rights, women's rights, and he could deliver a stump speech that would electrify you. And he always wore his red vest and his little IWW pin right up to the very end. He lived well past 90 years of age. And you know, right up to the last time I saw him, shortly before his death, that fire, that conviction was still in his face. The guy they decided to prosecute wasn't innocent-looking Jack Miller. It was this fellow here. This is Tom Tracy. And Tom Tracy was probably, we figured he was picked because he was the meanest-looking guy in the bunch. But by the time the defense committee got through with him, he looked like he might be an insurance salesman. He had a nice suit, good haircut, none of the stubble. He cleaned up his act. It's not absolutely certain that he needed to, because his defense attorney was a brilliant individual who made a legend of himself, George Vanderveer, was known as the Council for the Damned, and he destroyed his own life defending the IWW. But you know, in the early months of 1917, he also lifted the IWW up to a position that they were not to enjoy again. He defended Tom Tracy so successfully that by the end of the trial, there was serious doubt as to whether the IWW had killed anybody at all. He was devastating with hostile witnesses, and the transcripts of the trial been made into a very successful play. A dramatization by a local attorney was put on by the Renton Civic Theater a few years ago. A wonderful play about the trial that followed the Everett Massacre. Vanderveer was brilliant, and he was indefatigable in terms of fighting for the rights of the people that he saw as being the unjustly downtrodden. And McRae, almost all the things that the Wobblies were wishing on Don McRae in that nasty song they used to sing at the county jail came true. Don McRae was hounded, his animals and livestock were killed, he was chased out of Snohomish County, eventually wound up, and a modern publicist was sort of told him this was a bad move in terms of posterity. He accepted a job in Olympia when Roland Hartley became governor of the state of Washington. That made him look like a complete sellout. He lived on a big farm outside of Olympia down at Lacey, where he entertained politicians and raised livestock, and was known to drink to excess, something that the Wobblies accused him of in a memorable little volume called The Everett Massacre by Walker C. Smith. The pressure built up on Don and his wife, and eventually his wife, Donna, died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and he was completely alone. And then he disappears. We have no idea where he went from Lacey. People who were friends of his, nearly family, lost track of him after that. And it's all too mysterious. But for all intents and purposes, Don McRae's life was pretty effectively destroyed. The Wobblies, the United States government hounded the IWW out of existence. The Wobbly movement was, for all intents and purposes, destroyed just about the time that Don McRae was probably playing out the last of his tragic, conflicted life. And of course, World War I began for America almost immediately after the verdict in the Tracy trial came down. Just about the time the Wobblies were celebrating the fact that their 74 comrades had all been released. Only Tracy was ever actually brought to trial. The others were exonerated, released when he was acquitted. And of course, by the time the First World War was over, the industrial situation in the Pacific Northwest had changed a lot. And in the next decade after that, even more. The result, a lot of time came back to the IWW, because when we talked to old-timers 30 years ago, guys that had been young kids practically punking whistle in the logging camps around Snohomish County, they all believed that the Wobblies had died for them. They believed that what happened in Everett had resulted in the cleaning up of the woods, the cleaning up of the mills. You know, historians will argue about that, about what the real impact of the IWW was. But you know, we talked to an awful lot of people who believed that the Wobblies died for them, and that there was a direct causal relationship between that martyrdom back in 1916. Those legendary martyrs have endured, I think, right up to the people that we've lost just in the last few years who were turning 90-something. And were the people that remembered how powerful the sacrifice of a human life can be when it's in the context of social and economic justice.
Well, I want to thank the historian for that very competent, thorough review of the factual account of what happened. Now this is the song that those brave men were singing as they rowed that boat to their deaths. We meet today in freedom's cause and raise our voices high. We'll join our hands in union strong to battle or to die. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts beat strong. Side by side we battle onward. Victory shall come.
The Free Stehekin is a monthly newspaper. Then we have co-editor-in-chief Saku Almansari here with a list of angels that helped us make this newspaper what it is today.
I would like to thank the students, journalists who out Stehekin, the original newspaper. David Whittemore, Abria Evans, Evelyn Lee, Laura Flores, Brian Larson, Nicole Faiseth, Marilyn Hine, Isabel, Anna Thompson, Mercedes Tigner, Vince Ramirez, Blake Vitt, Rosanna Chupp, Lydia Thrower, Donna Fletch, Lydia Williams, Anthony Trish, Crystal Duffield, Mason Dolph Footland, Melissa Diltz, Brian Moore. I would also like to thank angels, people who gave their time, money, and equipment for us to publish. Randy Rowland, Kari Averill, Sue Johnson, Pat Powers, Joy Melby, Kay Powers, Diane Johnson, Evan Lindenberry, David Delgard, Donna and the Everett Historical Commission. We want to thank the Shingle Weaver unions and the industrial workers of the world for their good examples as fighters of workers' rights. We are grateful to the following unions who support our free speech fight: the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the International Longshore and Warehouse Union, SPIA, the Communication Workers of America, the Everett Education Association. Thanks in advance to all the students and workers to your contribution to our struggle for keeping us strong with a face to the censorship. Thank you.
We meet today in freedom's cause and raise our voices high. We'll join our hands in union strong to battle or to die. Hold the fort, for we are coming. Union hearts beat strong. Side by side we battle onward, victory shall come.
Hi, my name is David Whittemore. I'm the managing editor of the Free Stehekin, the newspaper. It's an underground newspaper produced and created by the students that go to Cascade High School. I'm just going to get down to the point. Last year, our superintendent, Carol Whitehead, along with the Everett School District, began enforcing prior review among its high school newspapers. As a student voice, we believe that prior review takes away from such a free speech coming from the high school itself. To students, being a public forum means that they're creating a place where their Superintendent Carol Whitehead's decision to withhold funds from student publications until they remove the words public forum from their masthead. And after the school board allowed an administrator prior review of their papers, the editors-in-chief of the Kodak Claire Lewinberg and Sarah Eccleston, as well as the editor-in-chief of the Stehekin, Amanda Franke, have decided to take the school district to federal court with the date set for May 29, 2007. Throughout all 4 years of high school, students are taught in their history classes to respect those who have stood up for their rights, rose up, allowing to choose what is important to write about, not what the teacher administrators think is right. A public forum is a place where students are allowed to confront and discuss the issues that are important to them, a place that shows teenagers that their ideas have merit, which we believe is extremely important because Everett School District reporters, like many teens today, want to prove to our society that a better world is possible. Even if our words aren't the answers to someone else's questions, after the school board decided to uphold Principal Catherine Matthews' decisions and